From judo and wrestling to taekwondo and karate, combat sports is on display on a global stage every 4 years. A range of different Olympians parlayed success there into later careers in mixed martial arts. Let's take a look at all of those who reached the UFC and rank them based on their overall career achievements. Keep in mind, all of these fighters are amongst the absolute elite in their respective field, having represented their country on the world stage while also competing against the top shelf of MMA athletes inside the Octagon. Ben Askren. Funky was one of the most accomplished college wrestlers in 2000's Missouri, earning All-American honors 4 times and racking up a pair of national titles and Dan Hodge trophies along the way. Askren transitioned to freestyle competition and qualified to the 2008 Olympics, but did not earn a medal, getting the 7th place at the 74-kilogram division. Ben went on to tally a perfect 18-0 record, earning the Bellator and 1 FC welterweight belts before leaving retirement and competing in the UFC thrice. Despite a stellar career, Askren will most likely be remembered by being in the receiving end of 2 infamous knockouts in the later stages of his career. Solid A tier. Askren had great success at the collegiate level and managed to be a force to be reckoned with outside of the UFC, but failed to deliver inside the Octagon. Although he stepped into the Octagon clearly far from his prime, his wet blanket style of fighting and brash personality on the mic made him a controversial figure in MMA.
Marty, do you know me? Yes. Yeah. How do you know me? I know you because we used to hang out.
Michel Batista. Moving on to another wrestler, Michel Batista picked up a bronze medal in the 2008 Beijing Games for Cuba. 8 years later, he moved to MMA and parlayed a 4-0 record and an old wrestling victory over Daniel Cormier into a spot on Robert Whittaker's squad on season 28 of The Ultimate Fighter, where he made it to the semifinals. He competed on the season finale card, losing to Maurice Green by submission. D tier. His Olympic medal was claimed despite losing the bronze medal fight. Batista was also benefited from Daniel Cormier's weight cut that made him miss the tournament, allowing the Cuban to come back to the bracket after losing the previous match. His transition to MMA wasn't smooth, as he struggled in the Ultimate Fighter show and couldn't compete in high-level mixed martial arts. Arjan Singh Bullar. Another heavyweight freestyle wrestler, Bullar was the first Indian to represent Canada at the Olympics in freestyle wrestling at the 2012 London Summer Games. He placed 13th in the Olympics and swiftly moved on. The heavyweight powerhouse turned to MMA 2 years later in 2014 and made his UFC debut in just his 7th pro fight. Bullar went on to post a 3-1 UFC record, with wins over Luis Henrique, Marcelo Golm, and Juan Adams, and his single loss coming from a rare omoplata submission loss to Adam Wieczorek. He left the UFC on a 2-fight winning streak and took his talents to Singapore, becoming the 1 FC heavyweight champion after defeating champion Brandon Vera. His last fight, however, could be described as one of the most embarrassing losses of all time, as Bullar lost by disqualification due to timidity. Bullar showed clear signs of inactivity, despite being shown a yellow card twice by Herb Dean. He's still the only fighter in ONE FC history to have lost by timidity.
That's the first time in the history of the company, of the organization, that we've ever issued a red card on timidity. The first time ever. He didn't want to fight. And if you don't want to fight, then why are you a professional fighter? And you definitely don't belong, at the top of the world in the pinnacle of martial arts. I was deeply disappointed in Arjan. And I think he let down India. India will no longer look at him as a hero.
C tier. Arjan left the UFC too early in his career to really be tested in high-level MMA. ONE FC has an historically shallow heavyweight division, giving him an easy path to the title after one single win in the organization. Regardless, having competed in the Olympics and being the lineal champion of a major MMA promotion is a feat very few can claim. Arjan Bullar will go down as the first Indian MMA champion for a major promotion.
Look at Michael Bisping. I mean, that shit, look at his eye. I mean, he's demolished for life, dude.
Henry Cejudo, the king of cringe himself. Triple C got his first taste of gold in Beijing when he became the then youngest American to win Olympic gold in wrestling at only 21 years old. 5 years later, Henry would turn professional in MMA and run out to a perfect 10-0 record, earning a shot at Demetrius Johnson for the flyweight title. Although Cejudo would be knocked out by the Natty Goat in the first round, he would avenge the loss and secure the belt 2 years later before moving up and collecting a second UFC title in the bantamweight division. His notable wins include Marlon Moraes, Dominic Cruz, and TJ Dillashaw, all by stoppage. Henry would shockingly retire on the first UFC show during the 2020 lockdown in an attempt to strong-arm Dana White into paying him more money.
Is there anything that would make you reconsider? I mean, if Dana comes to you and says, wait a minute, let's fatten up this check a little bit. You know, all the cringe is working. People are buying into the king of cringe. We need you around.
Yeah, he knows the number. He knows the number. And but I really do want to walk away. But like I said, man, money talks. Money talks. But I'm happy with the UFC. You know, I want to start that new chapter in my life.
The move would ultimately cost him his career as he stood in the sidelines for 3 years, watching the flyweights and bantamweights move on without him, before coming back to lose against Aljamain Sterling, Merab Dvalishvili, and Song Yadong. S tier. Despite his cringy antics in the mic, Henry Cejudo is undeniable. He is one of the only UFC double champs who defended both of his belts, while giving the flyweight division a much-needed breath of fresh air on the way. With 2 belts and an Olympic gold medal on top, Cejudo's resume will probably be untouchable for the foreseeable future.
First of all, fashion choice for today, the gloves. What's the story? Just is there too many people?
Too many people, too many handshaking. I'll shake everybody's hand, dude, but I'm not shaking it without these gloves, man. I got a little baby girl, baby America back home, and I got another one on the way. My wife's pregnant. I can't afford to get any of these people pregnant.
Mark Coleman. Coleman is a living MMA legend. The godfather of ground and pound got his start as a wrestler, earning several accolades competing for Miami University and the Ohio State University. After earning 3 gold medals at the Pan American Games, Coleman would earn a spot on the 1992 Olympic wrestling team and place 7th at the Barcelona Games. He made his MMA debut in 1996 at UFC 10, fighting 3 times in one night and becoming the UFC 10 tournament winner.
15-minute mark. And that is all. Big John McCarthy.
Mark Coleman in his first UFC will be a winner.
Mark Coleman wins UFC 10 in Birmingham, Alabama.
He would come back the following event at UFC 11, beating Julian Sanchez and Brian Johnston to become the second 2-time tournament winner after Royce Gracie.
My buddy Kevin Ranneman, who we might be doing an exhibition here. Wrestlers are the best. That's the bottom line.
His stellar career start wouldn't stop there, as he claimed the first UFC lineal heavyweight belt at the next event, UFC 12, with a stoppage win over Dan Severn. So in his first 6 fights, he won all of them by stoppage and claimed 2 tournament wins and a lineal belt. But after a 3-fight losing skid against Maurice Smith, Pete Williams, and Pedro Rizzo, Coleman left the UFC towards Japan, making his Pride FC debut in an alleged fixed fight against Nobuhiko Takada. The Hammer would later redeem himself in Japanese soil, winning 3 fights in the same night to capture the Pride FC 2000 Openweight Grand Prix tournament.
Oh, he got it. This is great. He made Mark Coleman has won the Pride fight. He's running away. He's running to the fence. I can't believe it.
Coleman's 14-year career would close in a full circle, returning to the Octagon and fighting fellow pioneer Randy Couture in his final fight, marking the first Hall of Famer vs. Hall of Famer bout in UFC history. After retirement, Coleman would continue to be an icon and coach for younger fighters and a hero outside of the cage.
I'm the happiest man in the world. I swear to God, I'm so lucky. I can't believe my parents are alive. I had to make the decision because I got out of my room and went to the door and it was already horrible. I couldn't breathe. I almost had to go outside. And I went back and got him. I can't believe it. I got him, but I couldn't find the hammer.
A tier. Coleman's wrestling and 14-year MMA career is absolutely loaded with titles, crazy stories, and single-night tournaments in the seminal years of the sport. Unfortunately, his loss against Takada will forever be an embarrassment to his legacy and to mixed martial arts history.
I won UFC 10, 3 fights in one night. I couldn't believe it, what had just happened. I'd walked off the wrestling match 35 days later. I'm beating up 3 guys and the cops ain't coming, nothing like that. I got paid, got a belt. Chicks started digging me, man. It was the greatest thing in the world. I forgot the question.
Daniel Cormier. Following his standout wrestling career at Oklahoma State, Cormier made it to the 2004 semifinals in Athens, placing 4th. He made the 2008 Beijing squad as well, earning the distinction of team captain before pulling out due to health reasons following a bad weight cut. He would make his MMA debut the following year for Strikeforce, later shocking the MMA world by capturing the Strikeforce Heavyweight Grand Prix belt, coming into the bracket as an alternate.
The Strikeforce Heavyweight World Grand Prix Tournament Champion, Daniel Cormier.
His UFC debut came in 2013, and his finish of fellow Olympian Dan Henderson at UFC 173 would put him in line to a title fight and a rivalry that would shape his career against John Jones. DC would go on to become one of the signature fighters in the 2010s, earning the light heavyweight and heavyweight titles and becoming the first fighter to defend the title in 2 weight classes. The Hall of Fame member is also a regular member of the UFC broadcast booth, although he might not be everybody's favorite.
When it comes to DC, I usually mute it.
S tier. DC is a living legend and one of the best to ever do it. A double champ and a 2-time Olympian, Cormier retired with 23 wins and 4 losses, losing only to fellow greats John Jones and Stipe Miocic. Although some may argue he probably also lost to the scale that time.
Habib.
Towel's bending.
Yeah, so look. The towel went down, Habib, too much. It went to 203 pounds.
Look, other guy. Look, Camacho, he
Camacho in the back. What is this?
Robelis Despaigne. The big boy represented Cuba at the London 2012 Olympics, earning the bronze medal in Taekwondo. A decade would pass before he made his mixed martial arts debut, but he would do so in dominant fashion. In 4 fights on the regional scene, Despaigne picked up 4 wins in a little more than 5 minutes of work, including 3 in a combined 19 seconds. When he made his UFC debut in March 2024, it only took 18 seconds to pick up his first victory in the Octagon. His bright start would soon fade on decision losses against unranked heavyweights Waldo Cortes Acosta and Austin Lane. His one-dimensional game would be greatly exposed after those losses, with the UFC releasing him shortly after in October 2024. Despaigne would quickly bounce back 2 months later at Karate Combat, winning by 4-second KO and a second win by 12-second KO. He's expected to compete in the newly formed Global Fighting League. C tier. Despaigne is undeniably a talented striker, but an unpolished all-around game for MMA made him meet his ceiling rather quickly in his career. At 38 years old and only 7 professional fights, the Cuban could still see a return to the Octagon sometime in the future, especially amongst the shallowest division in the UFC at heavyweight. He still holds the UFC record of longest reach in Octagon history with his 87-inch wingspan. Kayla Harrison. Harrison became the first American to earn an Olympic gold medal in judo when she did so in the 2012 London Olympics. She would repeat the feat in Brazil 4 years later, having already been inducted in the United States Judo Federation Hall of Fame. Kayla would transition into MMA in 2018, fighting in the PFL and winning 2 women's lightweight tournament, banking $2 million of prize money in the process. She would go on to compile a 16-1 record before making her UFC debut at the historical UFC 300 opposite Holly Holm. In her bantamweight debut, Harrison earned a second-round stoppage. Kayla is scheduled to fight former champ Juliana Pena for the bantamweight title at UFC 316.
You started your career in 2009. You're 10-5. I started in 2018, and I'm 17-1.
Yeah, it's easy to be 17-1 when you're fighting freaking tomato cans.
Who have you fought?
What was that? Who have you?
Who gave her a mic?
The same person that gave you one, sweetie.
S tier. Still early in her UFC career, the 34-year-old is a force to be reckoned with at women's MMA. While she doesn't have an UFC belt yet, 2 Olympic gold medals and 2 PFL tournament belts secure her the spot at the upper echelon of UFC Olympians.
Listen, it's going to be hard for you. It's going to be really hard looking at your ugly face. For me, it's going to be okay when you look in the mirror.
My mom thinks I'm pretty.
Dan Henderson. Hendo twice represented the United States in Greco-Roman wrestling, before going on to have one of the most iconic careers in mixed martial arts history. He would join the U.S. squad in Barcelona '92 and Atlanta '96, never reaching the podium. His 19-year MMA career began in 1997 in Brazil, debuting and winning a single-night tournament under Vale Tudo rules. Henderson would go on to win 2 more single-night tournaments, including UFC 17. His wrestling-oriented style would giving him an earlier nickname of Decision Dan, before his shocking knockout win over Renzo Gracie at Pride 13.
Knocked out. Renzo Gracie has been knocked out. I'm not sure if it was from the shoot.
Henderson would later refine his trademark overhand right, aptly named the H-bomb, to add to his granite chin and solid grappling pedigree. Hendo would earn titles in Pride, Strikeforce, and the UFC, sharing legendary battles with the likes of Mauricio Shogun Rua, Michael Bisping, and Anderson Silva, just to name a few. S tier. Dan represented the U.S. on 2 Olympic Games, won the UFC 17 single-night middleweight tournament, and held the welterweight and middleweight belts in Pride. On top of that, fought an absolute murderer's row in his amazing 19-year career, giving us unforgettable wars and, at the very least, one unforgettable knockout.
That's it! He's down! And it is all over! Dan Henderson has knocked out Michael Bisping!
Normally, I'm not that way in fights. I know if the guy's out, I tend to stop. I knew I hit him out, and I think that one was just to shut him up a little bit.
Congratulations, we look forward to seeing you again. Dan Henderson, ladies and gentlemen!
Kevin Jackson. Before Henry Cejudo, there was Kevin Jackson. The 4-time All-American wrestler rolled his success onto the world stage when he won gold in Barcelona in 1992. His trophy case also included 2 golds at the Pan American Games and 2 golds at the Wrestling World Championships in the early 90s. When he stepped into the Octagon at UFC 14, he was just the 2nd gold medalist to do so, after his U.S. teammate in Mark Schultz. Jackson beat Todd Butler and Tony Franklin, both in under 2 minutes, and won the single-night light heavyweight tournament in July 1997. He would later fight for the inaugural light heavyweight championship in December 1997, falling to fellow legend and MMA pioneer Frank Shamrock. A tier. Considered among the greatest freestyle wrestlers in U.S. history, a legend with multiple titles at collegiate and international levels, with a successful transition into mixed martial arts. Although Jackson had a very brief 14-month MMA career, standing at 4 wins and 2 defeats, he managed to win gold and have the 1998 Fight of the Year against Jerry Bolander. Winning UFC gold and Olympic gold is a feat reserved for few, and Kevin Jackson is one of them.
And watching his 30 for 30, and Chuck said the best, it was just like he was happy fighting because it made him happy. If you have a job you're happy with, that's your job. My job is to be successful and try to do other things to transduce into other stuff.
Daniel Kelly. The most prolific Olympic competitor came from Australia, as Daniel Kelly represented the Aussies 4 times before coaching the Australian judo team at the 2016 and 2020 Olympics. Kelly represented Australia in Sydney, Athens, Beijing, and London from 2000 to 2012, never cracking the top 5. He would debut in MMA in 2006, but would make a full transition after his 17th place in London, in 2012. He would stack a 9-0 record before being knocked out by Sam Alvey in his native Australia. Kelly would be a familiar face in various Australian cards from 2014 until 2018, compiling a 6-4 record before retiring on a 3-fight losing skid. D tier. Kelly managed to qualify for 4 Olympic Games, but could never reach the semifinals in any of his attempts. He still managed to enter the UFC at 37 years old, probably due to a lack of Australian fighters, to fill the home cards on the emerging MMA market for the UFC.
I only want to answer his questions from now on. Would I fight a girl? Yeah. Would you? Equality.
Matt Lindland. Matt Lindland earned his spot on the United States wrestling squad through some peculiar circumstances, which included an appeal that led to a rematch of the final team trials match. That legal dispute would later earn him the nickname The Law. Lindland's success would continue from the court to the mat at the Sydney 2000 Olympics, where he would earn a silver medal. He would make his UFC debut at UFC 29 in 2000, earning him a KO win against Yoji Anjo. Lindland would challenge for the UFC middleweight belt in 2002 against Murilo Bustamante in a now infamous fight. The Law reappeared to challenge an armbar from the Brazilian, refuting John McCarthy's stoppage and forcing the match to restart, only to be submitted again by Bustamante in a guillotine choke at the 3rd round. A year later, the Team Quest member would be the centerpiece for another infamous fight at UFC 43, this time knocking himself out while attempting a slam against Falanico Vitale. He would retire on a 22-9 record while fighting at middleweight, light heavyweight, and a single heavyweight bout against Fedor Emelianenko. B tier. The Olympic silver medalist would only achieve moderate success in MMA. Lindland was a reliable top 10 fighter in 2000's MMA, never cracking the code to a mixed martial arts belt. His notable wins include Phil Baroni, Pat Miletich, Jeremy Horn, and Carlos Newton.
Explain your relationship with Dana White.
Oh, I mean, he's a demonic individual. Like he's definitely possessed by demons.
Hector Lombard. Looking only at his highlight reel, you wouldn't guess Hector Lombard was once an Olympic grappler. Lombard represented Cuba in the Sydney 2000 Summer Games, losing the first match on the knockout stage. The Cuban judoka took his multiple national judo titles into mixed martial arts, starting his career in his adoptive country of Australia. Hector would later move into the 2009 Bellator Middleweight Grand Prix to crown the promotion's first middleweight champion. With 3 brutal knockouts, Lombard would be crowned the champion, a title he would never lose until his departure from Bellator to join the UFC. He would debut in the Octagon riding a 22-fight winning streak spanning 6 years and a reputation as a knockout artist, but would fall short in a decision loss over crafty veteran Tim Boesch. His time in the Octagon stretched from 2012 to 2018 and included wins over Nate Marquardt and Jake Shields, as well as shocking stoppage losses at the hands of Neil Magny and fellow Olympian Dan Henderson. B tier. Lombard was a force to be reckoned with in his prime outside of the UFC, being the top dog at Bellator for several years, while stacking up a terrifying highlight reel. He stepped into the Octagon maybe too late into his career at 34 years old and couldn't crack into the top 5, retiring from top competition on a 6-fight losing skid, including 3 devastating knockout losses.
You'd have to be a moron to pick Mark Madsen to win this fight. He's awful. Mark Madsen can't wrestle. I know he's an Olympian, but we've seen no evidence of his good wrestling so far in his career.
Mark Madsen. Denmark's Mark Madsen entered MMA as a highly accomplished Greco-Roman wrestler, earning silver 4 times at the World Championships and once at the Olympics. He kicked off his MMA career with 8 straight wins before joining the UFC. His undefeated run continued inside the Octagon, earning 4 straight victories over the likes of Clay Guida and Vince Pichel. His undefeated run would come to an end in 2022, and after stoppage losses to Grant Dawson and Jared Gordon, the 38-year-old Madsen called it a career at 12 wins and 2 losses. C tier. An Olympic silver medalist, Madsen transitioned to MMA, but remained true his one-dimensional wrestling-oriented fighting style. his demise would ultimately come from well-rounded MMA fighters inside the deepest division in the UFC at lightweight. Madsen was unable to crack the top 15 inside the Octagon, but can retire on an accomplished athletic career.
But yeah, I do got a big head. You wanna know I got a big head? Because I got a lot of brains, baby.
Sara McMann. McMann became the first American woman to earn an Olympic medal in wrestling when she earned her silver in Athens 2004. Her wrestling accolades also include World Cup and Pan American gold medals. 7 years later, in 2011, she began her MMA career, amassing a perfect 7-0 record before debuting inside the Octagon. McMann challenged a prime Ronda Rousey for the bantamweight title in just her second UFC bout at UFC 170. Although she would ultimately lose, McMann's tenure ran through 2022 and included notable wins over Lauren Murphy, Jessica Ai, and Lena Landsberg, while losing to WMMA's upper echelons such as Amanda Nunes, Juliana Pena, and Ketlin Vieira. C tier. While elite at freestyle wrestling, McMann found her MMA ceiling a bit far from women's top 5. Her mixed martial arts record stands at 14 wins and 7 losses, with her last fight coming at Bellator's Swan Song event in October 2023. The 44-year-old, although not officially retired, doesn't have a clear MMA future ahead.
The name of Jesus Christ. What happened to you? Wake up, USA. Go back for you, go for Jesus. Don't forget Jesus, people.
Yoel Romero. The Soldier of God represented Cuba twice, earning silver in Sydney 2000 in freestyle wrestling before making the jump to mixed martial arts. The UFC middleweight contender defected from Cuba to Germany in 2007, following a wrestling tournament in the country. Romero had relatives who lived in Germany and also knew it would be hard for him to pursue an MMA career had he remained in Cuba. His MMA journey started in Europe, compiling 4 knockout wins before signing with Strikeforce and later the UFC. The ever-explosive Cuban was known for his mercurial style of fighting, which he put on full display in duels against Robert Whittaker, Luke Rockhold, and Chris Weidman. Romero challenged for UFC gold 3 separate times, even knocking out former champion Luke Rockhold for the interim belt, but failing to capture the title because of a weight miss. Although he never was crowned champ, Romero was certainly one of the most feared 185ers in UFC history. The 47-year-old Romero is currently signed to GFL, slated to fight fellow legend Mauricio Shogun Rua later this year. A tier. With 11 knockout wins and 17 bouts, Romero was an absolute athletic freak of nature. A silver Olympic medalist and a fixture in pay-per-view main cards and a top 5 middleweight throughout his career, Romero was coined as the middleweight division's boogeyman. His issues with the scale ultimately costed him an UFC belt, but the legend of the Soldier of God will live on highlight reels for years to come.
When are we going to see women in the UFC, man? Never. Never?
Ronda Rousey. Perhaps the biggest sensation in the sport's history, not named Conor McGregor, Rousey's mixed martial arts career started after she became the first American to win a medal in judo. Her bronze medal in judo in Beijing 2008 served as a jumping board for her MMA career 3 years later, starting her professional career with 6 first-round armbars. Rousey went on to have one of the most influential and iconic careers in the sport's history. The former bantamweight champion and Hall of Fame member is regularly cited as the reason many women got their start in the sport, while also being credited with putting women's MMA inside the UFC. Her notable wins include Sara McMann, Liz Carmouche, Miesha Tate, and Sarah Kaufman. S tier. Although her response to the Holm and Nunes losses were terrible, her mark in the sport is absolutely undeniable. The first U.S.-American woman to earn an Olympic medal in judo, and the Strikeforce and UFC champion, Rousey defended her belt 7 times, all of them by stoppage, while propelling the UFC to new heights on mainstream media. A return to mixed martial arts seems rather unlikely, as the judoka is now signed with WWE and had just gave birth to her 2nd child.
I did an interview with Ronda Rousey the other day, too. Since
she asked about me? No, I'm just saying, off record.
Townsend Saunders. One of the many mat greats to emerge from Arizona State University, Saunders earned a freestyle wrestling silver medal in the 1996 Atlanta Games. The 2-time Pan American Games gold medalist transitioned to MMA and fought twice inside the UFC, losing his 2 fights to Pat Miletich and Mikey Burnett in the late 90s. C tier. The National Wrestling Hall of Fame member reached the highest highs in wrestling, but failed to apply his credentials inside the cage, retiring from MMA during its Human Cockfighting, Dark Ages, with 0 victories and 2 decision losses. Mark Schultz. When Mark Schultz competed in May 1996 at UFC 9, he was the first Olympic gold medalist to fight in the promotion's history. He did so on a day's notice, replacing his teammate, Dave Beneteau, who broke his hand training with Schultz. Mark defeated fellow legend Gary Goodridge via doctor stoppage due to a cut. His freestyle wrestling accolades are aplenty, including his Olympic gold in 1984 and 2 world titles in the 1980s. In 1986, Mark and his brother David were scouted by millionaire and wrestling enthusiast John DuPont to spearhead a national training center at John's mansion, to dire consequences. The Schultz's brothers' emotional story was adapted to the big screen in the movie Foxcatcher, as well as in many documentaries. If you want an in-depth dive into this thrilling story, I highly suggest the Netflix documentary Team Foxcatcher, where most of this footage can be found. B tier. Although an absolute legend at wrestling, the Olympic gold medalist's single-fight MMA career stops him from climbing the tier ranking. He will go down as one of the biggest what-ifs in mixed martial arts history.
All right. Whoa!
You said your dance moves were your biggest strength. It looked like
that and my autism. Autism is the best base for MMA.
Fredy Serrano. Colombia's Fredy Serrano represented his country in the Beijing 2008 Olympics after conquering bronze at the Pan American Games. Serrano participated in men's freestyle under 55 kilos, losing in the round of 16. But his Olympic credentials pushed him into an Ultimate Fighter Latin America spot, despite standing at a slim 1-0 record. He competed as a bantamweight for Team Verdum, but lost his first fight on the show. Despite the loss, Serrano was picked up by the promotion and won his first 2 UFC fights, with a performance bonus on top, before dropping decision losses to Ryan Benoit and Hector Sandoval, and being subsequently released from the promotion. D tier. Serrano lost the first match of the Olympics, as well as the first match at the Ultimate Fighter. Despite conquering 2 legitimate wins in the Octagon, he couldn't compete with the unranked flyweights of his class. He will go down as the first Colombian to fight inside the Octagon, and would retire on a 4-2 record at 39 years old. And that's the final tier list. Thank you for watching. Like the video if you liked the video, and subscribe to the channel if you want more of MMA lore. If I forgot somebody, please let me know in the comments section. Thank you for the support, it really means a lot. Now watch Tito trying to say Habib's name.
Caleb or Connor? I say Connor.
Khalid or Connor? God, Connor's just too damn good. That kid is just, confidence is through the roof.
There's fighters like Johnny Bones Jones, Conor McGregor. I keep saying Khabib, but it's actually Habib Menenenov.
And he texted me because there was another organization, Eagle FC. It's Khabib Menenenov. Probably pronounced his name wrong.